All right, everyone. Good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for having us this afternoon. And quick logistics and housekeeping before I pass it off to our awesome presenter today. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature during this meeting. And I apologize in advance for all the dings as people come in. It did not want to turn off today. So there's that. And if you have any questions during the meeting, please reach out. Either you can message me directly or just put it in the chat, and I will be sure to help you with anything that you may need help with during the training. Yes, it is being recorded, and yes, you will get a copy of the link once everything has gone through the communications review process. We will send that out after the training. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Brooke Babs, our Southeast Regional Consultant.
Oh, thank you, Marlia. And good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody is having a wonderful Tuesday. I know a lot of my districts had spring break last week. So if you did have spring break last week, I hope it was enjoyable. You got some rest, and now you know it's officially the countdown begins to summer. So, with that being said, it is my absolute honor to present to you all accommodating children with disabilities in school meal programs. And I'm going to try to turn. There we go. Whoop, went too fast. All right. So, as we as a department set students on a path to success, one of the ways that we can do this is by making sure they are ready to start their day of learning by eating school meals. So you all play a integral part in making sure that the students are on the path to success. And our mission statement is to develop extraordinary school nutrition professionals and to provide strategies to increase the consumption of healthy school meals. Now, the objectives of this training is to be able to define a disability, understand what information is needed to accommodate a child's impairment, understand what procedural safeguards are, distinguish between a disability and accommodations for food preferences. And finally, we're going to talk about, we're actually going to go over a review of frequently asked questions when it comes to meal modifications. So, what is considered a disability? Now, according to the American Disabilities Act, the term disabilities means a couple of things. It means a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of an individual, having a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. Now, under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 2008, most physical and mental impairments constitutes as a disability. So what does that include? That includes bodily functions such as digestive, bowel, and endocrine systems, and also a disability of any physical or mental impairment that will restrict the child's diet. It has to be reasonably accommodated. So, what do I mean by reasonable? Um, Providing a specific brand item when an equivalent is available at the school, we wouldn't consider that as reasonable. Now, providing foods to meet the needs of a child, say with that has PKU, that requires a specialized items, that would be considered a reasonable accommodation. So let's discuss the procedural safeguards. So when it comes to procedural safeguards, um, they are when LEAs have some sort of procedure to ensure that parents and guardians know how to request a modification for their child. So this process must be prompt. to provide a resolution of any kind of grievances, and also include the following allowable actions that you see on your screen. They should be able to have the right to file a grievance if they believe a violation has occurred regarding the request for a reasonable modification, receive a prompt and equitable resolution of a grievance, request and participate in an important hearing to help resolve their grievances, be represented by counsel at the hearing, examine the record, and receive notice of the final decision, and if necessary, their right to appeal. Now, a parent, guardian, or even a child, they have to be made feel that they can safely disagree if there are any decisions made about their meal modification, and can request to have changes made for their child. So there should already be some type of grievance systems either with the school districts, or you may have one on your own. You have to have that in place. And utilizing that is not only acceptable, but it's a good idea that you have that. So when it comes to a special diet, you should not delay accommodating the request. Now, however, you may not have all the information at the time of that initial request. So I would implore you to create some type of internal policy that's going to provide a time frame on which a temporary accommodation will be made without all the necessary requirements. And this will both safeguard you from making a request on an unending basis. So there will be a time where if they don't have the correct documentation that you need, this will kind of curve that, like, hey, you only have this amount of time to get that documentation in. So as I mentioned before, um, having this safeguard, it protects you and the student. Having a policy that allows you to provide what is requested without all the required documentation provides a time frame to discontinue it if all the information is not received. So when making meal modifications for students, um, it's highly encouraged but not required to have a 504 team. Um, when it comes to a 504 team, it often consists of a coordinator, um, school administrators, teachers, nurses, of course, the parents or guardians, and sometimes a member of school nutrition. Now, the 504 team, what they do, they'll produce a written plan for the student with a disability. Now, a written Section 504 plan is often a useful way to document that the LEA is engaged in the process to identify and also even address the needs of a student with a disability, and also communicate the information needed to successfully execute that plan. So it's important to note that any system that has 15 or more employees, they have to have a 504 coordinator. So if you don't know who your coordinator is, I um, highly recommend that you reach out, to your district office and ask who that person is, and just get yourself acquainted with them, and just tell them who you are, and try to get that process going with having some type of collaboration with them. So let's talk about medical statements that's needed for meal modification. So when is a medical statement required? So if the meal pattern must be altered in any kind of way, then a medical statement for the meal to be reimbursable is needed. So a good example is water instead of milk. Now, if the needs of the child can be met without altering the meal pattern, and can be done without a medical statement, then that statement is not required. So a good example of that is a child is allergic to strawberries, but can be provided an alternate fruit. Now, it's important to note that you all as SFAs can choose to require a medical statement for any kind of meal modification. So if it alters the meal pattern, of course, you have to have that. But if it doesn't, you can still make that as a requirement. That's your choice. So, what is the benefit of always having a medical statement? So, when you require a medical statement for all meal modifications, this can maybe help prevent preferences from being treated as allergies or any kind of medical ailment. Again, internal policies and procedural safeguards would, again, protect you all from any kind of grievance being filed against you. And it also protects the students to make sure that they have the foods that they need to get their day going. Uh-oh. So, what is actually included in the medical statement? So, when it comes to a medical statement, you have to have information related to the disability or impairment explaining why the accommodation is necessary. Impairment or disability is not required in the explanation. Statements must be from some medical professional with prescriptive authority. You also need to have explanation on what must be done to provide for the child and what foods to be omitted and what you can substitute for. Now, oftentimes, the statement will not include what to provide for the child, only what to omit. I must say, when you do have the medical statements for us to look at during your ARs, you do a really great job on getting the information from the parents to make sure that you do have an acceptable substitute. So kudos to you all for doing that. So I have a question. I know you all can't speak, but just kind of think about this for a minute. If a statement says omit milk, could the medical authority order to serve only juice for the child? And would that be reimbursable? If you're thinking yes, you're correct, but you have to have that written signed medical statement from the medical provider saying so. So these are medical professionals in the state of Tennessee who has prescriptive authority. You have your medical doctor, your doctor of osteopathy, your physician's assistant that has prescriptive authority, your nurse practitioners, your podiatrist, your optometrist, and your dentist. So here is an example from the state agency on meal modification sample, and you will notice it even if you go on our website. This link is active and it does work. So when you get the PowerPoint, you can just go either from this presentation or you can go to our S&P resource website. But notice that it does have a watermark and it has our logo. This is not intended to be used by the district, but just only as an example of what a meal modification looks like. We definitely want you to make it your own by putting it on your letterhead, maybe have the school district logo on it, however you want to do it. But it is intended just for you all to see what it will look like, but you have to make it your own. So let's do a little practice here, what we learned so far. So you received the following medical statement. Student cannot consume pineapple juice due to allergic reaction. Provide other fruit instead. Signed, James Smith, MD. So is this document appropriate to provide a meal modification to the student? Let you all think about that for a second. Yes, it is. Because this statement included the impairment, what foods to omit, and what to provide instead. And it was signed by a medical professional. So if you say yes, good job. All right. So what if you get a medical statement and it is not clear? So to your best um, ability, what you can decipher, just provide as much as possible. Of course, you would definitely want to seek further information from the parent or guardian to provide what is needed for the child. Please do not reach out to the medical provider. That is the parent's responsibility to work with the medical professionals. We don't want any kind of issues to arrive because you going straight to the medical professionals instead of doing that paper trail on having the parents do that. However, you don't want to delay making these accommodations. And as I mentioned before, best practice is to create a local policy to implement so you can have that request for a limited amount of time without the proper documentation. So let's talk about meal modifications and reasonable accommodations. So whenever you make meal modifications for students with a disability, um, we will always say, no matter what, make sure it's reasonable, right? You have a reasonable accommodation. So what is a reasonable accommodation? FNS definition is it's a change or some type of alteration in policies, practice, and or procedures to accommodate a disability that ensures children with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in or benefit from the program. So the request must be related to the child's debilitating condition. And of course, this is on a case by case basis. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that every child is included at the table. So you just really want to make sure that they're not feeling singled out or excluded, even if it means a special feeding utensil is needed for your child. That you want to have for them so they can be included in meals that's being offered. So, we want to make sure that every child is included at the table. So, when it comes to a reasonable meal modification, it must be provided for the child at no extra cost to the child, and that is regulatory. So, when when we talk about services that's outside of the meal program, you all as SFAs are not required to provide meal services, special foods, or any kind of supplements to children with disabilities when the meal service is not normally available to all the children. So, in the case if the IEP or the 504 includes special foods or some type of supplements that's outside of the normal meal periods, the LEA administration is responsible for providing these and allocating the associated cost of making these accommodations. So, what does that mean? So, if you're told to provide snacks for the child outside of your meal service because it's in their 504 plan, then that would be the responsibility of the LEA to provide and allocate those funds to do so. So the Individual Disability Education Act, or IDEA, they do have funds to cover these needs or, these higher cost items according to their regulations. So basically, the LEA could indicate in their 504 plan that school nutrition would be responsible for this service, but ultimately it is on the LEA to be responsible for that. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the difference between a medical request and a preference. So when it comes to food preference requests in school nutrition, they are optional. And if provided, it must meet the USDA meal pattern. So examples of food preferences are on your screen here. General health concerns, food preferences, vegetarianism, religious or moral convictions. So, if a parent believes their child must have, let's say, a gluten-free meal because these are healthier, um, that is not an impairment. That's only the parent's perceived view of a healthy meal. So, do you have to provide a gluten-free meal if they ask? The answer is no, you do not. It's optional because this is a parent's belief, um, not something that is for an impairment, say like with somebody with celiac disease. So if you choose to honor that preference, you would need to be prepared to provide for all other students who parents said they want their child to have a gluten-free meal too. So, in short, if you do it for one, you have to do it for everybody. This really isn't a big topic like it used to be, but let's talk a little bit about milk substitutes. So, per 7 CFR 210.10 M2, SFAs may provide milk substitutes for non disability reasons that meet specific criteria without a medical statement. So, if a milk substitute is requested, um, you all must notify us as a state agency via the fluid milk substitution form. And you all must provide a fluid milk substitute that meets certain nutritional standards, and that the child's parent or legal guardian, they have to submit a written request for that milk substitution. And this should be on a case by case basis. And regulations also states that some type of documentation is necessary, and accommodation must still occur, like I mentioned before, on a case by case basis. But if you all opt to provide milk under this waiver, a medical note is not necessary. So here is the form that you can access on our website. You can go to S&P Resources under the waivers tab, and this link is active and it does work. So once you get the um, PowerPoint slides, you can access it that way as well. So let's practice. Let's do a little quiz here. You decide to allow milk substitutions for non-medical purposes. You provide a soy beverage that meets USDA requirements in place of milk to accommodate these requests. Now, you receive the following note from a parent. Please provide my child with coconut milk because she is lactose intolerant. What would you do? Thing you should do is to inform the parent that you can only provide soy beverage without a medical statement. Now, if they have some type of underlying medical condition, let's say a chance they have a milk allergy and they have a soy allergy. If they are still requesting that coconut milk, they would need a medical documentation from their medical provider in order to get that. So let's talk about some frequently asked questions. Now, oftentimes there is a frequently asked question about accommodating students through offer versus serve. So, at schools that participate in offer versus serve, children with disabilities must have the option to select all of the food components or items made available to other children. So SFAs cannot accommodate a child's disability by asking that child to exclude a food component or item from their selection unless there is a signed medical statement that says so. So if a child has a medical statement that indicates, let's say they have digestive issues with fluid milk, but the statement does not specify what to substitute, you would definitely need to get more clarification on that. So if a parent states that the child drinks juice at home instead of milk, um, you would have them complete a medical statement to provide that juice. And with that statement maintained on file, that would be considered a complete offering with just 4 components. So in the case you provide juice at the request of a parent without a medical statement, would that be reimbursable? Would that be allowable to do? If you said no, you are correct. But in the meantime, you still need to accommodate until you can get that statement obtained. Now, If you are serving a meal substitute that meets the required nutritional profile, then that can be offered to the child as long as you have that waiver on file with us at TDOE. So, if a parent or guardian states that their child no longer needs that meal modification, FNS or Food and Nutrition Services, they do not require a written medical statement. However, um, they do recommend that you all as SFAs ask the parent or guardian to sign a statement indicating that their child no longer needs that modification before ending that service of the modified meal to the child. So even if your SFA does not require a signed document to discontinue a meal modification, um, I would highly recommend and encourage you all to create some type of paper trail for documentation, because I know I kind of going back to my internship. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. So, if possible, just make sure you have some type of documentation for discontinuing the meal modification. It can be done through email to the parent. If they call and request the meal modification to cease, just follow up with an email just to have some type of paper trail. So, when it comes to having separate tables for children with special dietary needs, um, it has to be based on what is best for the child. Um, Now, a child cannot be forced to sit at a separate table. And if their friends want to eat with them, they have to be allowed to join with them if they choose to do that. Now, it's important to remember you cannot guarantee that an allergen will not appear at the allergy table. So, you got people that would eat, like particular allergen, let's say like peanuts, they might eat it at home, but they can bring it on. Some kids just have that, that reaction to where they just, just the smell of it just throws them into an anaphylactic shock. So you really can't guarantee that. So allergy spaces can be used, um, but it can't be forced on that child. So you all as directors, like I said again, you can't guarantee that an allergen will not appear in the cafeteria. So I just want you all to be aware and cautious when you are designating these types of spaces. So, what role does an individualized education program, or what we call as IEP, play in meal modifications? So, the IEP should work in conjunction with meal modifications. A meal modification stated in the IEP must include all the information required in a medical statement. So, if written medical verification is obtained through the IEP process, then it won't be necessary for you all to obtain a separate medical statement. And meal modification requests should be a team approach, right? And the IEP provider should be made aware of the process on how to implement these meal modifications when necessary. So let's talk about gluten-free diets. Um, when it comes to gluten-free, you definitely want to work with your parent or guardian to really have a clear understanding of the severity of the disability and what the student's needs are. You definitely want to review the ingredients labels of all your products that you serve to look for hidden gluten sources. And a good way of doing that is collaborating with your vendors and your distributors. They can be a great source of information to find out if a product contains gluten. So, what are some common sources of gluten? Well, we know gluten is from wheat, barley, and rye, and its derivatives. When we talk about wheat varieties, that includes spelt, was it tricale, semolina, durum, farina, and farro. You have malt, and that can be in various forms like malted barley flour. If you're fancy and you offer these kids milkshakes, sometimes the malted milkshakes have gluten in it. Malt syrup or malt vinegar. Soy sauce. That's made with soy and crushed wheat. That's usually fermented for several days. Ooh, gravies and sauce. Many use wheat flour as a thickener. When it comes to broth and bouillon, it's usually made with idolized yeast extract that's made from barley. Deli meats, meat patties like your hamburger patty, your chicken patty. Usually they sometimes they'll use hydrolyzed wheat proteins that helps with the texture of the meats. Burgers. A lot of times that's used with that's made with seitan, which is a wheat gluten. Seasoning mixes. Sometimes they'll use wheat starch as an anti-caking agent to keep it from clumping up. And pudding, again, they use wheat flour as its thickener. So you got to be really, really careful when it comes. Gluten can be hidden in all kind of different products. And you may see on the ingredients list these following items, and you probably wouldn't even know that it contains gluten. So they are hydrolyzed vegetable or plant protein, modified starch, vegetable starch, some artificial flavors, seasonings, uh, different types of flavorings, or dextrin or maltodextrin. So they can be hidden in plain sight. Now, some naturally gluten-free grains that actually credits in school nutrition are rice, oats, corn, cornbread, grits, hominy, and hasa morena. You got quinoa, you got buckwheat, millet, teff, and amaranth. Now, even though a grain may be naturally gluten-free, it's still important to be aware of how the grain was processed and the child's degree to sensitivity to gluten. A gluten-free grain that's processed in a plant that processes gluten-based grains, it may not be appropriate for that child. So definitely reach out to the parents, reach out to the vendors to make sure that we are um, doing our due diligence and making sure that the kids stay safe. So when it comes to gluten-free products, they're often made from gluten-free flour, so such as potato, soy, tapioca, bean, nut flours, and arrowroot. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. These are just some things that we just want to kind of um, show you that there are some flours that's made that are gluten-free. So, what does a gluten-free menu look like? So, the goal here, if possible, is to mirror what the standard menu that you have and try to mirror that into a gluten-free option. So, for example, here, the standard menu, you have a soft shell beef taco on a flour tortilla, a hamburger on a bun, and a chef salad with a roll. That's your standard menu. Now, a gluten-free option would be a homemade taco using a corn tortilla and using taco seasoning without gluten, or using for a hamburger using a 100% beef burger on a gluten-free bun, and the chef salad with a gluten-free muffin. So let's practice here. So for those who can see the PowerPoint, you are reviewing an ingredients list for a new gluten-free diet request. Of the following ingredients, which may be hidden sources of gluten? Select all that apply. Don't you just love that when they say select all that applies? That gets me nervous. So you have your hydrolyzed plant protein, your whole grain oats, your black beans, brown rice, and malt vinegar. What do you think are some hidden sources of gluten? Now, if you said hydrolyzed plant protein, whole grain oats, and malt vinegar, you know your stuff. Kudos. So let's keep practicing and put into, do some scenarios. So, what would you do? A parent states that their child is allergic to strawberries and wants you to prevent the child from receiving strawberries. I want you to think about this here. What is your internal policy for handling that type of situation? Now, this particular accommodation can be made without a medical statement. However, if your policy states that all modifications require a medical statement, then this accommodation of the strawberries should be made for a specific amount of time and discontinue if that um, medical documentation is not provided. So, what would you do? You receive the following medical statement: child does not drink milk, provide juice at all meals. In this particular um, medical statement, this accommodation is outside of the meal pattern, so therefore you will need some type of medical statement from a medical provider in order for their meals to be reimbursable. Again, I'm saying this and I keep repeating this, but I just want to, hammer this home. What is your internal policy regarding this? You know, provide accommodations for a specific amount of time according to your internal procedures. You definitely want to communicate to the parent or guardian that this accommodation can be provided for a specific amount of time while awaiting proper documentation. So if that documentation is not received during that time frame, then you can cease the accommodation. So what would happen if you um, provide the accommodation, but you didn't have any kind of internal policy on how long an accommodation could be made without the proper documentation? In this particular situation, it may be difficult to remove the accommodation, although it's not allowable. So this is why it's best to implement an internal policy and have some type of procedural safeguards that will limit the time frame on temporary accommodations. So, what would you do? A parent requests that their child be offered almond milk in the place of cow's milk at meals. Yeah. What is your internal policy to address this? Now, this accommodation may or may not require a medical statement according to your internal policy. If you allow milk substitutions without a medical statement, just be sure to ask yourself, have I informed the state agency that I am implementing this waiver? And is this non-dairy beverage ready to be offered? And does it meet the nutritional standards that is set by M&S? So there's a couple things to consider there. So what is the take-home message? If you have not already, it is very important that you implement internal policies, procedures, and safeguard in order to protect yourself as a program and what is best to serve the students. And when possible, you want to work closely with the parents and guardians to make sure that you are meeting the needs of the students and the program requirements that's adjacent to it. So if you all would be so kind to get your phones out and you would do that survey for me, scan that QR code. And if the QR code is not working, I do have the um, website link at the bottom here. And are there any questions or any concerns? I'll wait on my wait time. If there's any questions, put them in the chat. And if you have any questions about special diets, you can always feel free to reach out to me, reach out to your consultants, reach out to anybody at the state office. We'll be happy to assist you with any kind of questions you may have. I don't see any questions right now. Hey, Marley, are you on there? Are you here?
I am.
Okay.
I do not see
Okay.
any
I don't
questions in
see any
either.
either.
Yep.
Okay. I appreciate it. In the case, I thank you. And here's my contact information. If you need me, reach out to me. Happy to help you any way I can. Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great day.